Alright, ladies and gentlemen, in this video, I am going to be discussing the elevator situation during September 11th within both the North and the South Tower because there were a decent amount of people that were trapped within both of the elevators when the planes hit, and many of the elevators immediately plummeted but then had an emergency stop to where they only fell about 20, 15 floors maybe in terms of free fall. And I'm going to be talking about probably the craziest situation. It was a group of people trapped in an express elevator inside the North Tower. One of the people that happened to be trapped was a janitor who realized that the walls could be broken because they were made of sheetrock, and he used a tool that he just randomly had on him. I mean, this is just crazy to think about. An express elevator in the North Tower right after the planes get hit. You're in it with a bunch of people. One of them's a janitor who's got tools, and he broke through one of the elevator walls, I guess, into like a bathroom. This all happened on the 50th floor, which was obviously very good news for them, considering on the North Tower, the plane hit very high up. They weren't close to it. They were then told by a firefighter to go in another elevator because, believe it or not, many of the lower elevators that were not impacted by the crash, some of them were still working. They took an elevator down and got out of the North Tower. That was probably the craziest one in terms of stories that I've seen. The idea and just the sheer luck of being, I mean, there's like 6 or 7 people being in an elevator. One of them is a janitor. You're trapped possibly between floors to where even if you guys see with the elevators, they get stuck. You try and move the elevator, the doors with your hands to open them, and you actually normally you can get them open. It's hard, but you can do it. The problem is if it's trapped between both of the floors, you're not going to be able to get out that way. You would then have to try and break through the top and then try and find a way out that way. But they got very lucky. They broke through and like entered a bathroom. Just an interesting situation there. That was the North Tower. A lot of the escapes that I saw did happen in the South Tower. There were 3 people in the South Tower inside of an elevator traveling through the 87th floor when the plane hit. The elevator immediately plummeted, but then the emergency brakes were able to stop it. They were able to make it out and survive. There was another situation with an elevator on the 78th floor, which would have been a sky lobby in the South Tower. There were actually many people that were within the sky lobby of the South Tower that were able to survive, believe it or not. If you're familiar with the sky lobby of the South Tower, that is where the plane partially impacted, but 38 people were able to make it out, including several people that were stuck in elevators on the 78th floor. It would be very interesting to see just the way in which the plane entered the building and how much of the floor was actually destroyed. Because if you're talking about floor 78, that would have been directly in line with where the plane impacted. And that was also known as the Gore floor because apparently there was just a boatload of people that were gathered around the sky lobby and the 78th floor, possibly trying to get down. It's a little questionable on how many people were actually trying to get down just because of the situation. They were originally told to go back to their offices because they didn't want people out with all the flying debris from the North Tower, and they obviously didn't think another plane was going to hit the South Tower. I would say 99% of people thought the first one was an accident, including all the people in the offices of the South Tower. But it was the human instinct to get out of there, and a lot of people were trying to get out of there, and then bang, the South Tower gets hit. And I've talked about stories where people were originally leaving and actually walking or going to the elevator and then turning back because they were told to stay in the South Tower. It's safer rather than leaving. And there were a number of elevators. What I believe to happen, because it's also been reported that people heard like explosions within the tower, possibly a third explosion after the first 2. Obviously, the first one being the North Tower getting hit, the second one being the South Tower. People speculate that the third one could have been the elevators plummeting to the bottom and that creating a loud bang. That potentially could be true, especially in the lobby. Many of the firefighters reported that when they entered both of the lobbies of the North and South Tower and went to where the elevators are, like if you know the Twin Towers, there's the outer lobby area. It almost looks like a track, going around because it's got that carpeting. And then if you go into like the main hallway, you'll be able to see the elevators. There is not good photos on them. Normally it's just like you aren't even able to see any of the elevators, but apparently all of the rock, like the granite that had been used around the elevators, had been completely broken out, and they reported that most of the elevators on the bottom were completely just blown to smithereens. So I would imagine if they're saying that people took elevators to the bottom after the planes had hit, some of those elevators were probably still operational, honestly. I guess it just depends where you're at, because there were a ton of elevators on like 3 different sides of the main lobby area right in the middle. Now, obviously, the sad thought to all of this, especially in the South Tower, but really both of them, the South Tower because you have less time to react. The people that potentially were traveling on the South Tower, possibly trying to go down, the plane hits, it immediately stops, it loses power, or possibly it plummets all the way to the bottom and it doesn't hit an emergency brake. You know, those people possibly dying, that would be a horrible death. Or you've got people possibly trapped in between floors and then the South Tower collapses. That would just be another terrible situation. And obviously you're not going to hear, anything about that because you really can't document people being trapped. You just don't know where they're at. The only documented cases we have of people with the elevators is just the firefighters observing them, some of the elevators still working, and people escaping them through different means, possibly just pushing the door open themselves and then walking down or going onto another elevator and getting down. I personally thought that really none of the elevators works, but there's been several cases in reading some of these survival stories of people getting trapped in elevators, getting out, and then taking express elevators to the bottom. So evidently there were still some elevators that were working even after the towers had been impacted by the airplane. So I just thought that was also interesting. But I mean, I would say there's at least like 60 or 70 different people that were in elevators that were able to survive on September 11th, whether it's being saved by an emergency stop, which is several different stories where the elevator will start plummeting and then the emergency brakes will hit it and it'll stop, and then they can kind of get the door open because normally it'll stop right at an opening. And just some very interesting situations when it comes to trying to escape via an elevator. There was actually a story in the North Tower in the upper floors of people somehow thrown out of an elevator on impact from the airplane, and they both survived. So I'm not sure I really understand that. It would have to be like the doors were open or something. How do you get thrown out of an elevator? I guess it was a situation where the doors were open and maybe they were entering it or something, but pretty crazy. Either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.